evening and welcome to the Davis Parent University Lecture Series, now in its 12th year of bringing you nationally renowned authors and speakers who present the best tips and tools for raising healthy, well-balanced children. We are so glad that you could join us tonight, and we hope that you're all staying safe and healthy in these very unusual and challenging times. DPU is grateful to be able to offer its events virtually this year and would like to extend a very special thank you to Davis Media Access for its tech support and expertise. Davis Media Access will be recording tonight's event, so anyone who isn't able to join us live tonight can instead watch on DPU's website, that is davisparentuniversity.com. I'm Pamela Wu. I'm glad to be your host this evening. And before I introduce our keynote speaker, DPU would like to recognize its other community partners and sponsors. A very special thank you to our Dean's List sponsor, that is Lori Prismich of Remax Gold. Our other generous partners are Chris Lawson of Aperture Alley Photography, The Avid Reader, Davis Schools Foundation, Davis Joint Unified School District, and St. James School. Now, tonight's evening is going to begin with a 30-minute talk by our keynote presenter, Dr. Lisa Damour, followed by a 25-minute Q&A session with questions that many of you submitted ahead of time via email. We're going to aim to finish up at 6 p.m., so it'll be a 1-hour event. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our keynoter. Dr. Lisa Damour is a psychologist and best-selling author who is recognized as a thought leader by the American Psychological Association for her work on stress and anxiety. Dr. Damour is the author of 2 New York Times best-selling parenting books. They are Untangled, Guiding Teenage Girls Through the 7 Transitions into Adulthood, and this book, the one that we're going to be discussing tonight, and that is Under Pressure, Confronting the Epidemic of Stress and Anxiety in Girls. Dr. Damour also writes the monthly Adolescence column for the New York Times. She serves as a regular contributor to CBS News, maintains a private practice, consults and speaks internationally, is a senior advisor to the Schubert Center for Child Studies at Case Western Reserve University, and serves as the executive director of Laurel School Center for Research on Girls. We are so very pleased to have her with us this evening. Without further ado, please welcome back to Davis Parent University, Dr. Lisa Damour.
Thank you so much, Pamela. It's really nice to be back with you. I got to be with you earlier this year when things were still very new with the pandemic. Here we are.
Very weird.
It's very weird, and now it's weird and now familiar, and weird and gotten pretty old by this point. So I'm eager to think with you about what I was going to come talk with you about when I was going to travel to California, which is a book that I published in 2019 that who knew that stress and anxiety would take such center stage? I also wanted to mention, since we last saw each other, I've started a podcast called Ask Lisa, the Psychology of Parenting. It comes out every Tuesday, so the next one comes out tomorrow morning. It's available anywhere you can get podcasts, and it's a way that I've tried to respond in real time to the needs that are so prominent in parenting right now. The parenting is so hard and so complex. That I felt like a weekly way to be responsive to the needs of families was the right thing. So I just wanted to add that because I realized that had happened since I saw you last. So let me start by sharing my screen, and we're going to talk through sort of some of the big points from this book and how they apply now and also post-pandemic. So let's think about the epidemic of stress and anxiety in young people. So what we know is that stress and anxiety are on the rise. They were on the rise when I decided to write this book. Things have not improved in the time since I made that choice. That's the bad news. The good news is there is so much we can do as adults in the lives of young people that can help to support them. So I've got what we can do into 3 categories. First, we can correct some critical misunderstandings. Second, we can fix some well-meaning errors that we tend to make as parents. And finally, we can teach students to be tactical in their approach to school, because so much of what is pressure for kids has to do with how they do school. So to start with the first, it's really important that we change how we talk about stress. And I know that this is something I touched on in the spring. I actually do want to revisit it because it's just such a critical thing right now. So the general view in the culture is that stress is seen as a bad thing. Not supposed to have it. You want to avoid it. You want to minimize it. You should be worried if you're feeling a lot of it. Um, there are limits on how much stress is good for humans, but it's really important to appreciate that psychologists see stress as a totally normal and totally healthy phenomenon. The reason we see it as normal is that stress happens under any adaptation conditions. It's just part of being human. Anytime we are getting used to something new, working at the edge of our capacities, trying something hard, we will experience that as stressful. It can be a good thing, like becoming a parent. It can be a not good thing, like having to move. If it requires adaptation, we find it to be stressful. Now, that's the part about psychologists seeing it as totally normal, totally unavoidable aspect of life. In terms of seeing it as healthy, what we understand is that stress is fundamentally growth giving. That when people work at the edge of their capacities, they tend to expand their capacities. So, in terms of how we talk about this with kids, one thing that I like to say, and I say it any opportunity I get, is to say to them, school is supposed to be stressful for you in the same way that weightlifting is supposed to be stressful. You only gain capacity when you work at your uncomfortable edge. So if you go to the gym and don't lift anything heavy, just sort of dog it, lift only 1 pound weights, it might be all right, it might be pleasant, but you're not going to gain any muscle. Same thing with school. If you are not working at stuff that you find challenging and in fact uncomfortable, then you're not getting any benefit. Now, one interesting thing to sort of bring this into pandemic terms, one of the challenges is that many of us are watching our kids do school in real time. And we are not as comfortable as seasoned teachers with the idea that learning involves grappling. It is totally common, and this has also happened in my own house, where we can hear the rising tension in our kids' voice as they are struggling with something academic. And like any parent, when my kid's uncomfortable, it makes me uncomfortable, and I want to try to fix it so that they are more comfortable and I am more comfortable. And what we have to get used to in this is the idea that part of learning is struggling. And what I really love is that a lot of teachers have a language for this. They'll say to kids when they can see them really, sweating over their work, they'll say, "Are you having a good struggle or do you need help?" But that construct of there's a good struggle to be had in school, usually as parents we just never have to encounter it. We sort of hear the aftermath of their complaints, but we're not watching it in real time. But we have to, if we're going to say stress is part of school and school is supposed to be stressful, we also then, those of us who are able to hear our kid doing school in the other room, we have to put our money where our mouth is and not step in and not try to get them out of stressful situations if it is actually in the range of grappling where learning's going to happen. But we can hear the stress. And I've done this as a mother. I've got my 2 daughters are doing school at home. It is hard sometimes when I am aware that they are working at something that does not come easily to them and have questions and are feeling a little frustrated. And I've really had to, not altogether with 100% success, kind of hold myself back from wanting to step in and help. So first thing we can do is just talk about stress as a normal thing. Now, to be honest, right, we're in a pandemic that is causing chronic stress. And that's one of the forms of stress that psychologists are not on the side of. We do not see it as healthy. We do not see it as normal. It is when there is stress, which we see as fine, but no break from the stress. One thing we all need to be doing here as we are into our 8th month of this pandemic is to get good at taking breaks from chronic stress. This is hugely important. In pandemic terms, it means finding ways to check out from the pandemic, to not think about it, giving our kids ways to do it. Happy distractions are really important. But that same model of stress is good up to a point, up till the point it gets chronic, also applies to school under normal conditions. Part of how kids can sustain the normal stress of school is if they have ways that they can take a break and restore themselves. And sometimes when I think about things like the junior year, the kind of famously intense and overwhelming junior year of high school, so much of what I look at when I look at the junior year, I'm like, they can do all this work. They can't do it in the time allowed. So it's not the work. It's not that it's too hard. It's that it gives them no downtime to recover. And so when we think about stress, don't focus so much on diminishing the stress. The stress is good. It's good for your kid. You know, especially if it's academic stress. Focus on the question of, can they take a break? Like any good weightlifter, to rest, recover, pull themselves back together, and then go back in. Okay, another key misunderstanding, I mentioned this in the spring. This is in the book. This is important and worth revisiting. Anxiety is normal. Um, our culture has gotten to a place where we see all anxiety as potentially pathological, something you want to, sort of try to bring under control, something you don't want to see. There are pathological forms of anxiety. There's two kinds. One is when we have anxiety and nothing is wrong. The other is when we have anxiety that is way out of proportion to what's wrong. So having a panic attack over a quiz. The rest of the time, anxiety is our useful protective alarm system. So if your kid is really behind on a project, they should feel anxious. That anxiety is motivating, it is uncomfortable, and it will get them to get going so that they don't have to feel anxious. All the time, I take care of a lot of teenagers. All the time I say to them, back in pre-pandemic, if you show up at a party and you get super anxious, pay attention to that feeling. That is a good friend of yours. It is telling you something is not okay. We can transfer this lesson into the pandemic. If your kid is thinking about hanging out with other kids who they know aren't very good at managing distance, or who they don't really trust are taking good care in terms of precautions, and they feel anxious about it, that's good. We want to actually support that anxiety. If they're feeling nervous about the possibility of returning to school and nervous about the configuration of things, you can say to them, your anxiety is your friend. If it feels too close, your anxiety is going to ring its alarm and you're going to make more space. Or if you feel like kids are not following the rules, your anxiety is going to rise. You're going to get help from a grown-up if you need to. So treating anxiety as though it is our protector and our watch guard really, really is accurate. It also reduces kids' anxiety. And this is what's really critical about the reframing of stress as growth-giving and anxiety as protective, is that we have this whole body of research that shows that when kids understand the positive benefits of stress and anxiety, they take them much more in stride. And in fact, they can put them to good use. When kids are under the impression, as so many people in our culture are, that you're not supposed to feel stressed and you're not supposed to feel anxious, then they get stressed about being stressed and anxious about being anxious, which is hugely unuseful. Okay, another thing that is really important in helping kids manage their intense emotions is us being mindful of our reactions to their overreactions. So the nature of being a kid is you overreact. Sometimes the nature of being a grown-up is that you overreact. But it is just how kiddos are sometimes. And there's a neurological reason for this, and I'll come to that. But I would say in writing this book, and then now, I mean, it's interesting, a book that comes out in 2019, it's probably out of my hands early 2018. So I would say in the intervening 2.5 years since this book left my hands, I have remained totally preoccupied with this moment between parent and child when a kid is falling apart. And what I love about this moment is that it feels to me like ground zero for where we teach kids what to make of their own emotions. So if they're having a big, powerful emotion and we freak out, we are telling them, I am scared of those emotions, shut them down. If they're having a big, powerful emotion and we can take it in stride, they learn how to self-regulate and they are not frightened of their feelings. So this is a hugely powerful moment. Okay, so here's, I've come a long way on all of this, and this has really been a powerful focus for me. But what I talk about in the book is a story that happened while I was, when I used to travel places. I was visiting a fantastic girls' school in Dallas called Ursuline Dallas. And I was sitting around with the counselors, and we were talking about girls having meltdowns at school. So 2 days a week, I consult to a girls' school in my community. Girls having meltdowns at school is a fairly regular thing. And I was expressing my helplessness in the face of this. I was saying, you know what, kid has a meltdown. I just kind of wait it out. Like, I'm not really sure what to do. And I was talking about feeling not so capable all the time of containing them. And one of the counselors said, oh, well, that's when I get out a glitter jar. And I was like, what? And she said, a glitter jar. I'll go get you one. So she leaves, and I'm thinking, a glitter jar? Like, what is she talking about? And I'm thinking, okay, whatever she's returning with, I hate it. Like, I already hate it. Like, I have no idea what it is, but I already hate it. Okay, so why do I hate it? First of all, I am a huge snob and I hate anything that sounds like pop psychology. And I'm like, this sounds so pop psychology, I can hardly stand it. Second, I cannot stand glitter. I have two daughters. I have never been a fan of glitter. I've done everything to ban it from my home. And I was talking to another mom, and somehow our like loathing, our mutual loathing of glitter came up. And she goes, yeah, it's the STD of craft supplies. I was like, yes, like that is exactly the problem with glitter. So I'm sitting there thinking, like, I don't know what this lady's bringing back, but I'm not having it. So she comes back and she has something that looks like this: full of water, 3 tablespoons of sparkly purple glitter in the bottom, lid glued on. And she sits down across from me and she's holding the jar and she says, when a girl comes to my office like that, I do this. And she just starts shake, 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 shake. And then, the glitter all swirls. You can hardly see the water anymore. And then she puts it on the table between us. And then she says, and then I say to her, honey, this is your brain right now. So first, we're going to settle your glitter. And I'm like, okay, she's a genius. This is the smartest thing I have ever heard. Okay, why is it so smart? It is a perfect model of the neurology of the adolescent brain. Here's what we know. And by adolescent, I mean anywhere in terms of this remodeling, 11 to 16 is when, is the wide range. It hovers probably most closely around 13 if you average boys and girls. But what we know is that throughout that period, and actually deeper into late adolescence, early adulthood, the brain is busily remodeling. It's becoming faster and more powerful. And what we know is that it remodels in the order in which it initially developed, which is from the very primitive regions back here up to the more sophisticated frontal lobes here. Emotions are here, perspective maintaining ability is here. So what this means is that in middle and high school, you have a lot of gawky brains walking around. Brains where the emotions are full blast powerful and the perspective maintaining systems are fine until they get overridden by the emotions. So what I love about the glitter jar model is this picture is a calm kid, right? Clear, thinking, not having any trouble like reasoning, using their good logic. Then what happens is like, wham, something shakes the jar, right? Like they find out there was a party they weren't invited to, or they get a grade back that they weren't expecting. And it's this, the emotions which are upgraded are sufficiently powerful to take the whole thing down. And that's a glitter storm. And what this woman taught me is don't even bother trying to reason with a kid in a glitter storm. Give them a chance to re-regulate because they have dysregulated. It's a neurological dysregulation. Okay, so this changed my whole life. Come back to Shaker Heights where I live. I have yet to make a glitter jar. I cannot get there. It will never happen. But I feel like the instructions are not for the kid, they're for me. So the next time a kid's in my office falling apart, instead of being like, well, what happened and what'd you do and what, why didn't you study more or whatever dumb thing I would have said, I just say, do you want some water? Do you want me to stay or do you want a little time to yourself? But I just think to myself, settle the glitter, settle the glitter. And sure enough, what happens is their emotions calm down. That part of the brain goes sort of back to the level of power it deserves. Their frontal lobes come right back online. And then one of two things happens. Sometimes that's the fix. The fix is that they needed to re-regulate. The problem was that they became dysregulated, that their gawky brain, pulls their legs out from underneath them and then weird stuff happens like they have meltdowns at school. Give it the chance to re-regulate, they're okay. Or they can now figure out a solution, or we can now have a reasonable conversation about it, but don't even start with a kid until they have settled their glitter. So This will come in handy probably many times a week in the pandemic, but it's also a good general lesson. Okay, here's another well meaning error: avoidance feeds anxiety. This is very interesting in a pandemic. This is one of the most axiomatic things in psychology. We had done a terrible job of getting the word out about this, but the bottom line is that avoidance of the things we fear is a highly reinforcing thing that tends to increase our fears. So imagine, for example, I'm frightened of elevators. So I'm like, okay, I've got an elevator phobia. I hate elevators. I always take the stairs. So say I'm like, all right, I'm going to get over this. I'm going to fix my elevator phobia. All right, here I am. I'm in a hotel. There's an elevator. I'm walking to the elevator. I'm about to push the button. My anxiety goes through the roof. I'm like, forget it. I'm taking the stairs. Instant relief sets in. Okay, so you remember intro psych? If you took intro psych, that's a reinforcing experience. I felt bad. I avoided. I feel better. The next time I feel bad, first thing I'm going to want to do is to avoid the thing I fear. So that's the first course by which avoidance feeds anxiety. Here's the second course. I never discover that elevators are actually pretty reasonable, right? They almost always do exactly what they're supposed to do. I mean, I'm 50 years old in real life, and I have yet to ever encounter an elevator problem, right? And so I'm not frightened of elevators because I try them all the time. So when we're parenting, we have to be very careful of letting kids off the hook for things they fear, especially if it's in the normal range of what kids should be expected to do. So you decide in your community where you're at right now how you feel about COVID, exposure, all of that. Avoidance is probably right now the name of the game, important and a hugely valuable way that we keep ourselves safe. But what will be interesting to see is when it's time to return, really time to return. And there's no question in my mind that there will be kids who are quite anxious about going out into the world or going to school. And it's because they have had the anxiety relief of avoidance for months on end. Our solution will be baby steps, where we say, okay, you don't have to do it all at once, but I want you to try school for a week. Or I want you to come on a big walk around the block with me. Or I want you to, it is about exposure, confrontation, not using avoidance. You don't have to do it all on the first day, but you cannot continue to avoid if you want the anxiety to go away. Okay, we have to help kids do conflict well. So in terms of addressing the concerns families have and kids have, one of the really high points of anxiety for kids is when they're not getting along with one another. Now, we should fully expect that kids are not always going to get along with one another. And the reason we should fully expect this is if we think about what normal school is where we take a whole bunch of randomly selected children and put them in a classroom and we say, okay, now spend all day, every day together for a year. This is like if we wanted to create conflict, this is how we would go about it. So one of the mistakes we make as parents is when kids stop have a hard time getting along, we're like, oh, no way, I can't believe that's happening. All right, we should totally expect this to happen. They're human. And what we should do is, instead of getting anxious about that and helping them feel anxious about the fact that they're having a conflict, we should teach them how to do conflict. And this is one of my favorite topics and something we have so much room to teach kids about. But the reason that we tend not to teach kids about it is that we as a group, adults as a group, are not that good at conflict. So it's kind of hard for us to teach our kids things that we ourselves don't do all that well. So here is how I teach healthy conflict. And as you listen to this, you will quickly hear that there are probably 40 opportunities a day in your home to practice this in a pandemic. One of the things we're finding in a pandemic is there's a lot of family time. We're all really close. The quarters can feel tight at times. And so don't worry about the fact that your kids may not have the same socialization that they normally would. You can call this your conflict clinic that you're doing over many months of a pandemic, and your kids are going to be conflict superheroes when they come back to school. Okay, so how do we teach conflict? First thing we do is we talk about the fact that there are unhealthy and healthy forms of conflict. So the unhealthy forms, the metaphors I like to use, are to be a bulldozer, where you run people over, to be a doormat, where you allow yourself to be run over, or to be a doormat with spikes, which is my favorite and the most common, which is basically passive aggressive behavior. Passive aggressive behavior is so predominant that I actually like to talk about it in three subcategories. So there's using guilt as a weapon, there's playing the part of a victim, and there's involving third parties in what's really a two-party dispute. So those are the unhealthy forms. There's one healthy form, and that's being a pillar, standing up for yourself while you are respectful of everyone else. So I love talking with kids about various versions of this. I'll say something like, okay, let's say there's a kid in your group, like not a super close friend, but you hang out in the same circle, and this is all pre-pandemic, and I'll give you a pandemic version. And you had him over to your birthday party, and then you're like scanning through Instagram, and you can see he has totally had a birthday party, and you totally are not there. All right, there's your conflict. And then I'll say to kids, okay, let's just do the unhealthy ones first. Let's get them out of our systems. All right, if you were gonna bulldozer this, what would you do? And kids will be like, oh man, I'd like go up and punch him in the face, right? Or I'd like yell at him in front of the lockers. And I'm like, yeah, that would be it. And then I say, if you were gonna doormat this, what would it look like? And they'll say, oh, I'd like cry in my room and wonder why everybody hated me and be sad, Say, yep. And then I say, if you were going to doormat with spike this, what would you do? And they're like, oh, where to start, right? Like there's so many options. Often they start on social media. So they'll be like, oh, I'd invite everybody over and like take a whole bunch of pictures of us, except for not that kid, and then accidentally tag him in the pictures, or something like that. Or I think girls may do this more than boys. I don't exactly know, but it's always felt like girls are the ones who are giving this example where they're like, or you write like a message on like, online, like, don't you hate it when somebody you thought was a really good friend turns out not to be a good friend, sort of the kind of victim stance. So they're very good at copying to their unhealthy tactics, which we ourselves as adults also use for sure. And then I say, okay, if you were going to be a pillar, how would you do it? And they're great. They'll say, I'd probably go up to them and say, hey, I saw you had a party. Are we okay? Something like that. Just deal with it directly. I love thinking this through with them. They're very good at coming up with creative solutions. They hang on to these metaphors. These metaphors really stick for them. I love thinking through all of the ways they can be pillars when they need to be pillars. And what I say to them is, if you're going to have a conflict, do it as a pillar. This may mean you have to first daydream all the, bulldozer, doormat with spikes things you want to do, then get yourself to a pillar. But I will tell you, one thing that I have come along with in my work on this is the if part of the conflict. Because especially a lot of my work is with girls, and especially I think in the name of sort of female empowerment, we often urge girls into conflicts they don't need to have. And what I mean by this is, like, our daughter will come home and be like, oh my gosh, this girl Betty, she was so mean. She said my shoes were ugly. And we're like, you need to say something to Betty. Okay, maybe. But here's the reality. No functioning adult engages every annoyance or slight. There is a huge amount that we're like, not worth it. Not worth my time, not worth my trouble. I'm not doing it. Now, this can be a very empowered position, and we need to remember this. So when a kiddo comes my way and brings a complaint about mistreatment, I will say, is this the kind of thing you feel you want to take up with the person? And I will really have them evaluate it. Is this a relationship that you really care about? Is your dignity so injured that you must say something regardless of the outcome? If you pillar with this person, will they pillar back with you? And kids know each other. They'll be like, nope, it will be doormat with spikes all day long. Okay, why would we send a kid into that conflict? So if we assess that they don't really need to engage the conflict, what they actually need to do is they need to register the injury with an adult, is often what I will find. Because sometimes kids will be like, oh man, I didn't get invited to this birthday party, and I just can't believe it. And I'll say, oh, well, do you want to say something? They're like, well, no, I don't like him. You're just like, okay, but you're hurt that you weren't invited, which I get. So then I'll say, all right, you have one more option for healthy conflict. And it's what I call emotional Aikido. So Aikido is this form of martial arts where if someone comes at you, this is all I know about Aikido, the first maneuver is you dodge and you let them keep going. And the rationale is that sometimes they just keep going or they go bother someone else, but there's no tactical benefit in taking the first attack. So I'll say, well, why don't you just emotional Aikido this? I'll explain what it is. And it's important to give them that construct because usually we confuse it with doormat. So if somebody hurts your feelings and you say nothing, we often, especially with girls, are like, well, don't let her walk all over you. Okay, there is doormat, like, oh, she hurt my feelings, I'm so sad. And there is tactical non response. And they may look the same on the surface, they are two very different things. Tactical non response is, this is not worth my time. So I am just going to pretend it did not happen. And this is something that's hugely valuable for us to teach kids as an option. And I'll say, if the person keeps bothering you, come on back, we'll figure it out, right? But like, you don't have to react to everything. Okay, now this is something I don't get to do when I'm traveling. When I was in Palo Alto, pre-pandemic, but not too long pre-pandemic, I gave a talk, and at the end, this lovely older man came up, and he said, I made this gift for you. And it turned out he's a psychologist. We've stayed in touch. So he gives me this box, and I open it up, and he had read Under Pressure, and he put together this box that contains a bulldozer, a little doormat, the bulldozer's moving off my computer, and a doormat with spikes, and also a pillar. And I actually burst into tears when he gave it to me. I was so moved by that. So I don't get to travel with that, but I keep it on my desk. All right, moving on. Let's talk about helping students be strategic. Now, I'm going to talk about this tonight a little differently than I might otherwise because of the pandemic. So the way I would otherwise talk about this is, especially with regard to girls, I want to make sure that they do not become highly inefficient at school. So the bottom line on this is that if you look really broad strokes at gender differences, so this will apply to some of your kids, but not all of your kids. Girls as a group are really great about school, tend to get better grades than boys, tend to be more conscientious than boys. They also tend to be way more inefficient. So if I stick with these gender stereotypes, which I totally appreciate are problematic, but when we look at the data, it maps on pretty cleanly, except for like your kid, right? Like that's how it always goes. What we tend to see is that boys are better than girls at walking up to assignments and saying, what's the least I have to do to get this done? Or what's the least I have to do to keep the grown-ups off my back? Okay, this makes parents bananas because you're like, dude, why are you always riding the razor's edge? It is not a bad idea, though, because what boys start to figure out how to do is to use their efforts efficiently. Girls, on the other hand, as a group, are more likely to walk up to something and be like, how do I polish this to the highest shine? And also this, and also this, and also this. And here the grown-ups are going, look at you go. And they're saying to their sons, buddy, why can't you be more like your sister? Okay, get them to junior year. Junior year for me is like like where it all shows up. Often the boys and girls are getting the same grades in class. Boys are doing way less work because they trust their capacities. Girls trust their elbow grease. They've never checked to see what happens if they hardly try because they never hardly try. So one of the things I want you to do if you have a overconscientious daughter or son, the second they have a work ethic in place, and that's important. Nothing happens without a work ethic. The second your kid has a good work ethic, 7th grade, 8th grade, somewhere in there is usually when it consolidates. Start talking with them about being strategic. So if your daughter is making 60 flashcards and you can tell she's been assigned 30, say, what are you doing? And she's like, I don't know, makes the teacher happy, I really, whatever. You may be like, this isn't a good use of your time. The only acceptable answer is, I love this subject so much, I lost myself in it. If she wants to go extra mile on that, that's fine. If she is turning in extra credit in classes where she's got a high A, you need to call that question. Like, is this really good use of your time? My favorite line on this came from a friend of mine whose son said to my friend, she was sort of giving him a bit of a hard time about not studying for something that he was actually in the class where he's doing really well. And he was like, Mom, the difference between a 93 and a 99 is a life. I'm like, okay, that sums it right up. So what I mean is, be very cautious of praising the 99. Um, it especially with kids who want to please us, and there's lots of kids who want to please us, they will continue to go for the 99, even if they don't care about it, they're getting enough learning, or, and grades do matter, they're going to get the same grade on the report card whether they get a 99 or a 93. So this is the space I want us to play. Here's the thing I want to say in light of the pandemic. Motivation is in the toilet for most kids. This is what I am seeing across the country. Their interest in doing school is really low. There are 400 good reasons for this. School is really hard. School doesn't have all the fun parts. School's now often on a computer. It's all very tedious. The way we're going to help our kids right now is to talk about motivation. And what we're going to talk about is sometimes you feel like doing it and sometimes you got to do it. If you don't feel like doing it, it's perfectly fine to come up with strategies that help you when you've got to do it. There's no shame in needing extrinsic motivators. Here's a list of extrinsic motivators. You sitting with them and keeping them company because it all feels so hard. You bringing them an M&M for every 25 minutes that they have focused, or 5 M&Ms, or whatever you think is necessary. You saying, if you get this done, you want to go on a walk around the block with the dog. You saying, you are doing the most amazing job. This is so hard. I am so impressed that you are upright, paying attention, and even trying. This is so tedious. They need all the support, all the rewards, all the praise on like steroids 24/7. This is a really hard year. So part of how we're being strategic is not to make kids feel bad if they don't feel like doing the work. School is all vegetables, no dessert right now. They deserve more by way of support. Okay, I'm going to wrap up here. This is where Under Pressure wraps up, actually, is on the topic of what it means to be non-white in our culture. So the way I address this in Under Pressure is to say this. There's 6 chapters in the book. The chapters are coming to terms with stress and anxiety, and then it's girls at home, girls among girls, girls among boys, girls at school, and girls in the culture. Those are the 6 chapters. The last section of the last chapter, so the ending of the book, is called The Headwinds of Prejudice. And what I talk about there, what I say there is basically this. All right, if you've got a daughter, and actually I would say 80% of your sons, he contends with all of the stresses in this book. If they're non-white, there is an entire extra layer that pervades their daily experience of what it means to be non-white in this country. And the way we want to think about this is that it is endlessly taxing to be non-white in this country, no matter what you do or where you are. Now, interestingly, as I mentioned, this book was out of my hands in 2018. You can imagine how glad I have been to see this conversation become a much more prominent and universal conversation about what it means to be non-white. And what I talk about in this section of the book is what it means to be anti-racist, which is we have to think about this in terms of there are wins working against people who are non-white. And it is not enough for those of us who are white to say, I'm not racist. We actually have to be tailwinds to try to make things more fair. To say, I'm not in it, just keeps everybody else on the hook. To say I am actively working not only to not be a headwind, to not make things harder for people of color, but actually to be a tailwind who tries to level things is actually what is called upon if we're going to have any honest conversation about stress and anxiety in our culture. So I'm going to wrap up there and take it back to Pamela.
Okay. And I'm going to unmute myself. I have so many thoughts. Thank you.
You're welcome.
First of all. Second of all, I took so many notes. I wrote emotional Aikido and doormat with spikes and headwinds and prejudice. And I also thought to myself, when you talked about girls like doing twice as much and aiming for the 99, that doesn't stop in adulthood in the working world at all. And so I'm so glad to hear you talking about sort of giving our girls this perspective in their teen years, because what is the difference between 93 and 99?
Nope.
in right in like the larger scope of things.
Well, and so it's interesting when the book came out, I published an op-ed in the Times called "Why Girls Beat Boys at School and Lose to Them in the Office,"
Mm,
where I unpacked this thinking, which is basically girls spend school, and again, appreciating broad gender strokes. This is
indeed.
not the only reason girls lose to men in the office. There's a
Yeah.
lot of other factors at play. But girls spend school figuring out how to work. And they don't actually develop a lot of confidence in their native abilities
Mhm.
because they never test them. Whereas boys are testing them all the time.
Yeah.
So boys show up at the office and they're like, I got it, right? And girls who may actually have a better grip on things are like, I'm not sure, like, oh, let me just start working and see what I can do. And it is that confidence gap that people have pointed to. But part of how we're undermining girls' confidence is to let them overwork all the time and to give them the impression that they're only as good as how hard they're working versus they have brains, they have talent, they can fall back on those. And so, what I am saying to any kiddo who needs it all the time is all right, every work project you walk up to, here's the question I want you to ask yourself: how far can I get on my brains? And what increment of brawn do I need to add to that to get to the outcome I want? And and the thing that again, broad gender strokes, boys do this innately. They're like,
Yes.
I think I can phone that one in, right? And then they phone it in and then they get an A and they're like, I'm awesome. Girls walk up to the same thing. They work for 2 hours, they get an A, and their takeaway is, takes 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
We just see this all the way through. So it's really fun. And I talk about this in Under Pressure. So I've got two daughters, and I was writing this book when my older daughter was in the seventh grade. She's now an 11th grader, so you can tell why hence my preoccupation with the junior year, which I'm always preoccupied with, because for me that is like where it all goes south.
Junior year is crazy though. I mean, how many of us remember just, I mean, doing homework until midnight
It's so
junior
bad.
year?
And like we had it easy compared to these kids today. I
Mm,
mean, it's so hard. And so to really start to say to her, you've got 104 in that class, stop working. Stop working. Like don't do any like if you stop working right now, what grade are you gonna get? You know, and it's such an interesting thing because it's so cuts against what high achieving women themselves have done. And so to play in that space of like be tactical, be strategic, if you've got 104, how low can you get on the next thing and still keep your grade while getting the learning you need?
that is, it's just such great advice and such, I think, important perspective. We have so many parents interested in all of your perspectives. I have pages of questions here.
Oh, good. Okay,
So
well,
I'm
let's
going to
see what we
dive
can get
in.
done.
um, let's see. Let's start with, I like this one. What are the long-term impacts of this pandemic slash social distancing slash lockdown on teenagers' mental and emotional health? And how can parents lessen the negative impacts going forward?
Okay, so there are some ways there could be some pretty ugly long-term impacts. I'm just going to name them. If your kid develops a substance abuse disorder in this, if your kid becomes deeply depressed and self-harming in this, and if your kid develops an eating disorder in this could leave a dent that lasts for, it causes irreversible problems. Like that, like those are the three things. Drugs, depression,
Mhm.
eating. And I'm seeing eating just like all of a sudden. It's actually the topic of tomorrow morning's podcast because all of a sudden I am just seeing eating stuff everywhere and boys too. I'm doing a thing for WETA PBS tomorrow night, and we did a big survey in advance of it. And all of the adolescents, their top concern, no, across the adolescents on average, the top concern was body image, fitness, eating. It was the number one concern for 40% of the boys as well. 55.
Wow.
So eating, like, do not let your kid develop an eating disorder in the pandemic because those are a life sentence. So, like, I mean, really, those. I mean, kids can recover, but it's not what you want. Okay, so setting those to the side, but I just want to give a really blunt and direct answer on that. The rest depends on how you run things at home. Depends on how your kid like their configuration of things. You've got a lot of power. What I would say, the things you want to do. Um, think about the atmosphere in your home. They're home a lot. You're home a lot. And if you're like, what should the atmosphere look like? Two factors: warmth and structure. you should be going out of your way to take good care of yourself so you can make life at home feel pretty comfortable, pretty relaxed as much as possible. You're all together a lot. You want this to feel like a good time. You want your kids to look back on this as a nice time in your family. And structure, some predictability, some sense of routine, some sense of like, an idea of how the day is going to go down. Um, but think of yourself as a steady presence. Like that's what our kids need. That's what we're going to want to be. But this is super hard. But I don't think that there should be any lasting, frightening implications once you take those first three things out of the picture.
I think you may have sort of answered the next question, which is, with everything going on right now, what should our parenting like number one and number two priorities be? You said warmth and structure. Is that combo sort of it?
Yep. Hit those. And the thing is, you don't have to get an A plus on both every day, right? Like go for like a high B average over a week, right? So there, you
Don't
have
go for the 104.
104, right? Like 87, an 87 on these is good. Like I'll tell you, I mean, it's funny. I've gotten my energy. I was so tired today. Like I had such a Monday, and I was really sluggish. And so like I was a good mom. I wasn't a great mom. Um, but I also did, because I am trying to keep my kids afloat and cheer them like crazy. I made a Starbucks run midday to bring home treats that they requested. I just wanted, like, I was like, I'll just do it. So high on warmth,
Mhm.
but I don't think our structure was so good today. But focus on those. Focus on those.
Okay, going for that B plus average, I think is also, that perspective. So
Yes.
warmth, structure, B plus average. I
Yep.
like it. We can do this.
You can do it. You can.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about a kid who has like zero anxiety. This one says, my son says that he understands the pandemic is terrible, but he himself is truly not suffering. He really is enjoying this lifestyle. I'm kind of worried about how he's going to handle going back to a full day of school and sports when now he's done with school by 11 a.m. and spends his days fishing, skateboarding, working out until dinner time, watching the TV. He is living his best life.
I was thinking that.
It literally says he's truly living his best life. Um, Not really what you think of for a high school junior, right? So what are your thoughts about the transition back to like real junior or senior year?
I love this.
Oh,
I have to say, I mean, it's not like we had the junior year sorted out. The junior
mhm.
year is a mess. And like as the mother of a junior, when it became clear what was going to come of this year, my kid's doing fine too. She's I mean, she's got a longer day. Um, but she does school from home, and she's a kid who's got tons of friends, but she's not hugely extroverted. She can really satisfy herself quite happily with, relatively low day-to-day contact, lots of online contact. And I said to her, "You've got one junior year in your whole life, and you're getting a pass on this. Like, you're like, take it." So, I mean, unless he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing, I wouldn't sweat this. I mean, I would say, like, you got lucky. He won the lottery, so did you. His one junior year is going to turn out to be a best life year. Never happens. So, he'll be fine.
Yeah, he's happy.
He's happy. Let him. It really. When people also worry about the college process, I'm like, oh, because we had the college process like it was perfect before, right? Well, the
Right.
college process is a disaster. So it'll be just different. But it's not like we're falling from this perfected wonderfulness.
Okay. Um, that's a good segue into our next question since we're talking about, a boy. And the next question is, can you please share your understanding of how stress and anxiety, look the same or look different in boys? How different and how might a parent best help their son navigate stress and anxiety versus their daughter?
Okay, so when we look at, like, if you're asking like straight up a gender question, and again, like anytime you get into a gender question, we're talking about overlapping bell curves, right? So we're talking about a lot of boys who look like girls, a lot of girls who look like boys, so that your kids won't fit these categories perfectly. But if we're going to do categories, one of the findings is that when it comes to psychological distress, girls discuss and boys distract. So you're going to know your daughter's stressed and anxious because she's going to want to talk to you about how stressed and anxious she is. And she's going to want to have a long conversation about how stressed and anxious she is. You might know your son's stressed and anxious because he is in his room playing video games and then outside shooting hoops and then, like hiding in the basement. So finding ways to actually just not think about it or to try not to think about it. One of these is not actually better than the other. Girls can sometimes do like this sort of ruminative cycle where they
Hmm.
become increasingly stressed and anxious as they go round and round on it. That's not good for them. Boys sometimes don't get the support they deserve because they're so busy distracting themselves from their distress or trying to keeping it in a nonverbal form that they don't always kind of make the connections they deserve in terms of support. So what I would say, like this is where it always comes down on gender stuff. Everybody should move to the middle, right? So there may be times when your boy needs to talk. Cara Natterson wrote a fabulous book called Decoding Boys, and a lot of it has to do with like getting into conversations with your son, not just accepting the closed door. There also may be times where your daughter needs to not talk about it so much and like just maybe like go rake leaves or do something else. Shutting it down when talking is no longer making it better.
Would you tell us the name and author of that book again so our audience
Um,
catches it?
Decoding Boys, and the author is Cara Natterson, Natterson. She's a pediatrician in LA. Really smart book about raising boys.
Sounds great. Okay, we've talked a lot about anxious kids. What about anxious parents? Our next question says, I'm an anxious parent of an anxious daughter. What tips do you have to help us work together to achieve some peace and calm?
So, the magic word in the pandemic is coping, right? The distress is a done deal. We're all in distress all the time. It's going to come down to how you cope. So there's better and worse coping. Let me tell you the worst: emotional withdrawal, cutting people off, substance misuse, um, what I call junk habits, taking a phone to bed and scrolling instead of sleeping, or only eating comfort foods or not getting off the couch, or just being like really, really short tempered with people. Those are the negative coping strategies. They're coping because they actually provide some relief in the short term, but they're negative because they're not going to work over time. Okay, so instead, you as a parent are going to model positive coping. And this is how you're going to do it. So you're going to do things like, instead of emotional withdrawal, good social support. Who do you connect with? Who does your daughter connect with that just like helps you feel better? Um, you're going to use happy distractions rather than substance abuse. You're going to lose yourself in a movie or a TV show or a book or nature or whatever it is. Like, that's how you're going to check out. You're going to take incredibly good care of yourself. Get tons of sleep, tons of exercise, eat really well. Not tons of exercise, but like really healthy physical activity. Eat really well, including treats. And then you're going to take care of other people. But the other thing you're going to do with regard to anxiety is you're going to help your daughter know that anxiety is one of the most treatable things we have. And the part of how you treat it is really developing a breathing practice. Breathing practices effectively short circuit the physiology of anxiety. Your lungs and your brain are connected. I go through this all in the book. When you slow down your breathing, it actually tells your brain to turn off the anxiety alarm. You're going to use cognitive approaches to challenge your own irrational thoughts. The definition of irrational anxiety is overestimating the threat, underestimating your ability to manage it. And you're not going to call everything anxiety. This is the other thing, that you're going to introduce her to a really nuanced and varied vocabulary for physiological arousal. What we call anxiety is just physiological arousal. The body is sort of moving into kind of a state of preparedness. Anytime you can, call it apprehension, excitement, go time, eagerness, worry, nerves, concern. But be cautious. This is the thing kiddos do, is they like call all physiological arousal anxiety, and then they get upset that they've got a lot of anxiety. No, they have a lot of physiological arousal for a wide variety of things coming their way. Bring more nuance to it. It gets them on their front foot. It keeps them from feeling like everywhere they turn it's anxiety.
Does words really matter? That makes so much sense.
They're more precise, and then they put kids
Yeah.
back in the driver's seat.
That's really great advice. I like that. Concern, worry, it leads to more precise thinking about it too.
Yes. Yes.
I'm so glad that you brought up the issue of the race conversation. Our next question reads, my teenager supports Black Lives Matter, which I applaud, but also embraces the stance of ACAB. All cops are, I'm going to say bad guys, but the B stands for a different word. Um, when I suggest that it's more productive to try to understand other and more moderate points of view, she gets angry and accuses me of white privilege. How seriously should I take and address this reaction, which is hard for me not to consider extreme,
It's a great question.
right?
Teenagers are on fire right now. Um, thank God for them. Um, I think there's probably a lot of ways to get this right. I think one way to get this right is to emotional Aikido a lot. Just be like, okay. Right? Just be like, I don't have it in me. I'm not doing it.
It's
This
a
is
hard,
not,
I mean, it's a hard conversation to have.
yep, you don't have to have it all the time.
Yes.
I think to the degree that you're in a space to have that conversation, I mean, I would ask her to lay out her reasoning for you, have her teach you. Um, Teenagers don't want to, like, they feel they have a lot to teach us, and I think they probably do. Get them talking, get them teaching. Listen, 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 listen. And then if you feel like there's a flaw in her reasoning, which there very well may be, you might say, I think there's a place where your argument doesn't hold up, or I think there's a place your argument could be stronger. Do you want to hear what I'm thinking? Ask her. Ask permission before you, like, knock before you barge in. Um, but it is it. This is they're going to move the culture forward. Teenagers, that's what they do. Um, I I get it. I'm having a lot of conversations like that in my house too, and you know, we also are together 24/7. So I'm not really in the mood to go toe to toe all the time. But I'm also pretty psyched by how much energy young people have for trying to make things better.
I think listening is in and of itself really great advice because they do have young people have so much to say about it these
Yep.
days. And I think
Yep.
even just indicating to them that you're willing to hear it and that you're interested
Yep.
is fantastic.
Hmm. And then you take
We
them seriously. I mean, that you'll engage it.
Yeah, absolutely. That it's that we want to have this conversation, that we care what you think.
Hmm.
We are about 1 minute away from 6 o'clock. So I want to give you a chance to maybe share any sort of parting words with us and also tell us once again the name of your podcast so we can
Oh, yeah.
find it.
Okay. Okay, so parting words. Here's what I think. I hate the pandemic. We all hate the pandemic. Okay, let's not waste the pandemic.
Yeah.
Here's what I want us to do. We are overdue for a reset on our definition of what constitutes mental health. Going into the pandemic, the prevailing definition is that you're mentally healthy when you feel calm and relaxed all the time. This was never true. That I don't know where that definition came from. No psychologist is on board with that. Here's the proper definition of mental health. You are mentally healthy when you're having the right feeling at the right time and you have the skills to weather it. So, you and your kids right now should feel plenty of anxiety, stress, frustration, anger, sadness, all evidence of your excellent mental health, so long as you have this capacity to weather it. So, you're going to use really good coping. You're going to model good coping for your kid. You're going to make sure your kid's using good coping. But if we can come out of this pandemic improved, it will be that we have a much more realistic view of what it means to be mentally healthy. Okay, and the podcast is Ask Lisa, the psychology of parenting. Um, you can find it everywhere. My website, drlisadamour.com, has a whole page about the podcast where you can find all the links to it. Has a ton of resources around managing meltdowns, managing stress, managing anxiety, what to do when a teenager's friend is in trouble. Like, they're all free, downloadable. So if you go to drlisadamour.com, there's just tons of free stuff there that I've developed very much with the pandemic in mind.
The book is Under Pressure, Confronting the Epidemic of Stress and Anxiety in Girls. Thank you so much, Dr. Damour. It's been a pleasure again to share the virtual stage with you.
Thank you, Pamela. It's good to see you.
You as well. And many thanks also to all of the parents who joined us tonight. And one more big shout out to Davis Media Access for hosting our event. Looking ahead on February 10th at 7 p.m., DPU is thrilled to present award winning journalist and author Peggy Orenstein, who will be sharing work from her New York Times bestseller, Boys and Sex. We hope that you can join us then as well. That's on February 10th at 7. Until then, please take care. Thank you for joining us. Have a great evening.